Laura Hobbs was born on September 25, 1996, in Texas. Later, her parents welcomed 3 sons, but the couple eventually separated. Following the separation, Laura's mother relocated with the children to the small town of Zion, Illinois. Laura cherished this new environment, as her maternal grandparents resided there, and she quickly formed new friendships. Additionally, Zion's proximity to Lake Michigan allowed her to enjoy outings with her family. In the spring of 2005, when Laura was 8 years old, her father chose to reconcile with her mother and re-enter the lives of his children. He moved from Texas to join the family. On Sunday, May 8, which was Mother's Day, Laura, along with her brothers and parents, celebrated by going to the lake to fly kites. They had a delightful time together. Later, Laura expressed a desire to take a walk with her best friend, 9-year-old Crystal. The girls attended the same school and lived nearby, having become fast friends shortly after Laura's move to Zion. They spent nearly all their free time together, visiting each other's homes, playing in their neighborhoods, and riding bikes. On occasions when Laura's mother restricted her from going out, Crystal would come to her window for a chat. On that particular day, the girls decided to ride their bikes to the park, which was only a few hundred yards from their homes. They frequently visited this park due to its close proximity and the long bike trail it offered. Despite their young age, their parents felt comfortable allowing them to go there, as both girls were familiar with the area and serious crimes were exceedingly rare in the town. The girls departed around 3:00 p.m. with the intention of returning for dinner. However, as time went on, their parents began to grow concerned when it reached 7:00 p.m. Laura and Crystal had not yet returned, prompting their families to head to the park and attempt to call them home. To the astonishment of the adults, the girls were absent. They walked along the bike path, calling out their names, but were met only with silence. Other relatives and friends quickly joined the search, scouring both the park and the surrounding neighborhood streets in hopes of locating the girls. This search persisted for several hours until darkness began to set in. By 9:00 p.m., the parents grew increasingly concerned that something might have happened to their daughters and decided to reach out to the police. The police promptly joined the search efforts, contacting volunteer organizations and enlisting the assistance of numerous volunteers and search dogs. Additionally, local residents who learned of the girls' disappearance also participated in the search. The police concentrated their efforts in the park area, as it was the intended destination of Laura and Crystal. In speaking with other children along the route from the girls' homes to the park, the police discovered that Laura and Crystal had indeed passed by, stopping to chat and mentioning their plans to go to the park. Simultaneously, the police conducted door-to-door inquiries in the neighborhood, hoping to find anyone who had seen the girls that evening. They also began distributing flyers containing information about the girls' disappearance. As each hour passed, it became increasingly clear that something grave had occurred. Darkness enveloped the town, and despite extensive searches, there were no signs of Laura and Crystal. The search continued almost until dawn, and around 4:30 a.m., the police decided to take a break. However, Laura's father and grandfather refused to return home, opting instead to continue their search in the area. They went to the park and chose to split up in order to cover more ground. At approximately 6:00 a.m., as dawn began to illuminate the surroundings, Laura's grandfather heard a sudden cry and hurried towards the source. He encountered Laura's father, who was in a state of shock, claiming to have discovered the bodies of Laura and Crystal. The girls were found off the bike path, concealed within dense underbrush. Laura's father quickly recognized the grim reality that both girls were deceased, as evident from the extensive blood and visible injuries. He promptly contacted the police, who arrived swiftly. Upon their examination, forensic experts concluded that the girls had succumbed to multiple stab wounds, likely inflicted by a knife. Laura had sustained 20 such wounds, while Crystal had 11. This tragic news reverberated throughout the small town, where such violent crimes were virtually unheard of, confronting the community with the chilling truth that an unknown assailant had taken the lives of 2 young girls just a short distance from their homes. The police dedicated their resources to apprehending the perpetrator, initially directing their suspicions towards Laura's father, Jerry. Their concern stemmed from the fact that he had discovered the bodies independently, despite prior searches conducted by officers and volunteers. Further investigation revealed Jerry's extensive criminal background, which included drug-related offenses and assaults. A notable incident in 2001 had prompted his wife and children to relocate to another state. On that occasion, while still residing in Texas, Jerry and his wife had a volatile argument that escalated rapidly. Witnesses, 3 men passing by, intervened, believing the woman was in peril. Jerry, filled with rage, retrieved his chainsaw and pursued the men. Eventually, they were able to restrain him until law enforcement arrived. Following this incident, Jerry faced legal charges and, a year later, received a sentence of 10 years of probation. As part of his probationary terms, he was obligated to regularly report to his probation officer. However, he failed to attend one of these appointments. As a result, his probation was revoked, leading to an 18-month prison sentence. He was released just weeks prior to the tragic deaths of his daughter and her friend, prompting him to come to Zion almost immediately after his release. For the police, it was evident that Jerry exhibited a tendency towards aggressive behavior, yet they lacked sufficient evidence or motive to charge him. They invited him for questioning, which he consented to, and over the course of more than 20 hours, investigators began to press him regarding his potential involvement. Initially, Jerry denied any connection to the deaths of his daughter and her friend, asserting that he and his wife had noticed Laura's absence and had gone searching for her. He claimed that he continued his search until he discovered the girls' bodies in the park. However, as the interrogation progressed, Jerry's narrative began to shift. Ultimately, under the unyielding pressure from the detectives, he started to confess. He admitted that on that fateful evening, he had indeed gone looking for his daughter and had seen her in the park with Crystal. He reprimanded her for leaving without permission and insisted that she accompany him, but she refused, prompting him to grasp her arm in an attempt to take her away. Jerry faced resistance from his daughter Laura, who refused to return home, while her friend Crystal insisted that he leave her alone. In a moment of escalating tension, Crystal brandished a small knife from her pocket, directing it towards Jerry. This provocation enraged him, leading to a violent confrontation in which he seized the knife and inflicted multiple stab wounds on both girls. He then abandoned their bodies in a secluded area of the park before walking away. The following morning, he allegedly discovered the girls and reported the incident to the police, attempting to shift suspicion away from himself. During his confession, Jerry was visibly emotional, yet he proceeded to sign his admission statement and reiterated it on camera. He recounted, "I was walking on the dirt trail when I encountered Laura and her friends. I told Laura she needed to come home, but she resisted. I grabbed her arm, and as she struggled, Crystal urged me to let her go. In response, Crystal drew a small knife and repeated her demand. In the heat of the moment, I struck Laura in the face, causing her to fall to the ground." The families of the girls were left in disbelief, unable to fathom that Laura's own father was the perpetrator. However, his wife later informed the authorities that she had always been aware of his violent tendencies, given his prior criminal history. Ultimately, Jerry confessed to his crimes and was arrested, awaiting trial. The prosecutors soon announced plans to pursue the death penalty. As preparations for the trial continued, several intriguing developments emerged in the case. Jerry was appointed. A lawyer asserted that he had no involvement in the murders, claiming that his confession was obtained under extreme duress from detectives who had interrogated him for more than 20 hours. He alleged that they threatened both him and his family and subjected him to physical mistreatment. At that time, he had not slept for over 2 days and was in a profoundly distressed state due to the murder of his daughter, which he was struggling to process. The police suggested that if he confessed to the murders, they would release him and allow him to rest. They effectively constructed a plausible scenario of the events, which he merely repeated. Once the detectives had formulated a coherent narrative, they documented his confession for him to sign and requested that he read the statement on camera. His attorney promptly sought a review of the case, but this request was quickly denied. The prosecution maintained that Jerry had confessed voluntarily and confirmed his statement on camera. However, after retracting his confession, he was subjected to a full trial with a jury, which extended his ordeal for several years. Subsequently, Jerry's lawyer uncovered critical information. He realized that there was no substantial evidence against his client and chose to investigate potential leads. He discovered that the medical examiners had not conducted a thorough examination of the victims' bodies, having only performed standard procedures such as taking swabs and collecting debris from beneath the girl's fingernails. After the samples were stored in the refrigerator, no one had thought to analyze their contents. The lawyer advocated for an independent laboratory examination of all the evidence. Although the prosecution attempted to hinder his efforts, he ultimately succeeded. In 2008, the examinations were conducted, revealing an unexpected development. It was discovered that Laura's body contained multiple distinct DNA samples. There was foreign skin found beneath her fingernails and male semen located on her clothing and in 3 areas on her body. Basic analysis indicated that none of this DNA belonged to Laura's father, pointing instead to an entirely different individual. This finding clearly suggested that Laura had been sexually assaulted. In contrast, no foreign DNA was detected on Crystal's body, yet there was a consensus that she had been murdered by the same perpetrator. Jerry's lawyer promptly sought his client's release from prison and the dismissal of all charges. However, an unwelcome surprise awaited him. The district prosecutor dismissed the new evidence, asserting that it was inconsequential. He contended that the presence of foreign DNA on Laura's body could be purely coincidental, suggesting that young couples frequently visited the park for intimate encounters, which could explain the semen found on the victim. Even the discovery of biological samples within the victim's body did not seem to concern him. Despite the implausibility of this explanation, Jerry remained incarcerated, awaiting the commencement of his trial. The trial proceeded, and the attorney succeeded in submitting the DNA sample to the FBI's database. However, no matches were found. All he could do was wait and hope that the perpetrator would eventually be apprehended, as there was little expectation of reasonableness from the prosecution in Jerry's case. Fast forward 4 years, and miles away from Zion, a 20-year-old woman named Amanda Snell, who had recently enlisted in the military, resided at a military base in Arlington, Virginia. She chose to join the military due to the numerous service members in her family. In addition to her military duties, she volunteered at a local church near the base, where she taught children with autism and other developmental challenges. Amanda soon recognized her desire to pursue this field professionally and intended to obtain the necessary education following her military service. On July 13, 2009, her failure to report for duty raised alarms among her fellow service members. They knocked on her door but received no answer. Upon discovering the door was unlocked, they entered to find the room impeccably organized, with the bed made and her belongings neatly arranged, yet Amanda was missing. It was only when they opened the closet that they encountered a chilling scene. Amanda's lifeless body was positioned unnaturally, with a pillowcase covering her head. Initially, the medical examiners were unable to ascertain the cause of death, but they later determined that Amanda had succumbed to suffocation, which had occurred more than a day prior to the discovery of her body. There were no indications of trauma present. Investigators determined that the body had not been the result of a sexual assault. They discovered that Amanda's laptop and tablet were missing only after speaking with her parents. During this conversation, they learned that Amanda suffered from severe headaches, which sometimes forced her to retreat to a dark room, covering her head with a pillowcase when the pain became unbearable. Given that Amanda was found in her closet with a pillowcase over her head, detectives speculated that her death might have been a tragic accident. However, they did not hastily dismiss the possibility of murder. In front of her closet, they found a trace of a man's shoe, but they were unable to determine its owner. As a result, the investigation remained open, with detectives continuing their search for a potential perpetrator. In February 2010, a 26-year-old woman from Arlington exited the metro station and made her way to her boyfriend's residence. While walking in the street, an unknown man approached her, brandishing a gun and demanding that she enter his vehicle. Despite the assailant grabbing her arm and wielding a knife, the woman managed to escape by throwing her purse as a distraction and fleeing toward her boyfriend's home. Upon hearing her screams, he and his friends rushed outside and contacted the police. By the time they arrived, the assailant had already fled the scene. Nevertheless, the woman was able to provide a detailed description of the suspect, including the model of his vehicle, a beige Dodge Durango. Based on her account, a composite sketch of the suspect was created, prompting the police to initiate a search. 2 weeks later, in February. On the evening of the 27th two women from Arlington were returning home after spending time with friends. As they stood at their doorstep, an unknown man approached from behind, brandishing a firearm and demanding their wallets. When the women informed him that they had no money, the assailant forced them inside the house and bound their hands. At one point, he left the room, allowing one of the women to free her hands. She seized a phone and dialed 911, however, the man quickly returned, snatched the phone, and smashed it against the wall. He then took one of the women to his car and drove away. After traveling a short distance, he assaulted her, covered her head with duct tape, and strangled her with a scarf until she lost consciousness. She later regained consciousness in the snow by the roadside, where passers-by found her and took her to the hospital. The police arrived promptly, and the woman provided them with a description of her attacker, as well as the model of his vehicle, a beige Dodge Durango. Notably, just 2 hours prior to this incident, another woman had reported to the police that a man matching the same description and driving a similar vehicle had approached her on the street, attempting to coerce her into his car. She had successfully used her stun gun on him and escaped. Investigators recognized that they were dealing with a serial and highly dangerous criminal in their vicinity. They concentrated their efforts on tracing the vehicle, which was more easily identifiable through databases. The police contacted all owners of such cars and soon experienced a breakthrough. During the examination of one of the vehicles, authorities uncovered a student identification card belonging to the same woman who had been abandoned in the snow, along with her earring inside the car. Additionally, they found the same type of tape that had been used to bind her head, as well as a stun gun. The vehicle's owner was identified as Jorge A. La Torres, a 21-year-old military serviceman stationed at the base where Amanda Snell's body had been discovered several months prior. Notably, he resided in the same building as Snell, just a few floors below her apartment. Upon searching his room, investigators located a pistol that he had acquired less than a month earlier, along with a substantial quantity of ammunition. Furthermore, they found a significant collection of explicit videos on his computer, showcasing acts of violence and cruelty, some of which included unconscious women. When photos of Torres and other men were presented to the three women who had been assaulted, all of them identified him without hesitation, recalling his face clearly as he had not attempted to hide it during the attacks. Following this identification, Torres was arrested and held in custody while awaiting trial. Investigators suspected him of kidnapping one woman and assaulting two others, a theory supported by the evidence at hand. However, they encountered a challenge when they began to suspect him in connection with Amanda's murder, as there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime. To address this, detectives implemented a strategic plan by placing an informant in his cell, someone who would wear a wire and engage him in conversation. Remarkably, this approach yielded quick results. Within a week, Torres began to confess. Torres openly bragged about his crimes, specifically admitting to the murder of Amanda, which he claimed he committed solely because the opportunity arose. He stated that the thrill of the act motivated him and provided a detailed description of how he concealed her body in a closet. Following the murder, Torres recounted the meticulous cleaning of her room to eliminate any evidence. However, he inadvertently left behind a crucial piece of evidence during the process. He disclosed to his cellmate that he had sexually assaulted the victim on her bed, using contraception. After relocating her to the closet, he made her bed but removed the top sheet, leaving the mattress pad behind. This pad was subsequently sent to a laboratory by the police, where experts discovered a minute sample of male DNA that matched Torres's perfectly. Additionally, Torres inadvertently revealed to an informant that he possessed a pair of Nike sneakers in his car. Crime scene analysts seized these shoes and found that the sole pattern corresponded exactly with the footprint discovered outside Amanda's closet. Consequently, Torres was formally charged with murder and remained in custody while awaiting trial. Meanwhile, a sample of his DNA was uploaded to the FBI's database, and several weeks later, local investigators identified a perfect match between Torres's DNA and the semen samples found on the body of the second victim. Even more surprising was the revelation that Torres hailed from Zion and was acquainted with the older brother of the second murdered girl, Crystal, establishing a connection that confirmed both Laura and Crystal were familiar with him. The information was supported by other children in the vicinity at the time of the girls' deaths. Torres was only 16 years old, and law enforcement had not considered him a suspect. Their attention was directed solely towards Laura's father, who had spent 5 years in prison awaiting trial. Following the DNA match, Jerry's attorney demanded his client's immediate release and the dismissal of all charges. The prosecutor found it difficult to contest this demand, as the evidence of Torres's presence on Laura's body ruled out any involvement from her father. Upon his release, Jerry expressed his intention to file a lawsuit against the police and authorities for coercing a false confession, which resulted in his 5 years of wrongful imprisonment. The authorities soon recognized their lack of a viable defense in this case and, fearing the repercussions of a potential loss, offered him a settlement, which he accepted, amounting to nearly $8 million. As for Torres, the legal proceedings in Virginia concluded 4 years after his arrest. He maintained his innocence, but the jury unanimously convicted him. He received a death sentence for Amanda's murder, along with 5 life sentences and an additional 168 years for the attempted abduction of 2 other women and the kidnapping of a third. Following this, he was extradited to Illinois to stand trial for the murders of Laura and Crystal. Initially, he denied his guilt, and his attorney argued that the evidence found on the victims was insufficient to establish his culpability. However, Torres was eventually presented with a plea deal, as he was already facing the death penalty.